"Get out, you wretch!" Those words, screamed by my own daughter, shattered my world in an instant. After building a $34 million company from nothing, after paying for her luxury home, her children's private schools, and her endless demands, this is how she repaid me. With contempt, with cruelty, in front of my own grandchildren. What she didn't know was that I had already made my decision. The next morning I transferred everything, sold my stake in the company, and disappeared to my secret chalet in Switzerland. No goodbyes, no explanations, just silence as I walked away from a family that only saw me as an ATM. But 3 weeks later, when my phone finally rang, I discovered a devastating truth about my granddaughter that would force me to choose between my dignity and my love. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people you sacrifice everything for, this story will break your heart and then slowly put it back together. Follow our channel for more powerful true stories that will change how you see family, forgiveness, and the true cost of unconditional love. Like and comment with your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members? Tell us where you're watching from. "Get out, you wretch!" Those words still echo in my head at night. The way they bounced off the marble countertops of that kitchen I paid for. The kitchen where I used to bake birthday cakes for my grandchildren. The kitchen that cost more than my first house. It wasn't the words themselves that broke me. It was how Caroline, my own flesh and blood, spat them out. Like I was garbage. Like I wasn't the woman who had nursed her through pneumonia for 2 sleepless weeks when she was 7. Like I hadn't built a company from nothing so she could have everything. I'm Eleanor Clark, 72 years old now, though I was only 68 when it happened. 4 years feels like 40 sometimes. That morning had started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at Caroline's sprawling Tudor home in Greenwich, Connecticut, the one I'd helped with the down payment on, carrying fresh bagels and cream cheese, a peace offering, though I hadn't done anything wrong. Caroline was sitting at her island counter, scrolling through her phone. Her husband, Richard, was leaning against the refrigerator, sipping his espresso from the $3,000 machine I'd gifted them last Christmas. "Good morning," I said, setting down the bag of bagels. The housekeeper, Magdalena, who I always made sure to tip generously because Caroline never did, nodded at me with a small smile. Caroline barely looked up. "Mom, did you talk to your financial advisor about that thing?" "No." "Hello?" "No. How's your back feeling after that fall last month?" "Just straight to money. Always money." "Which thing, dear?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "The Cabo trip. Spring break is coming up and we need to book the private villa. The kids deserve a proper vacation after their semester." My grandchildren, Jason, Emily, and little Rose, were huddled around the kitchen table, absorbed in their tablets. They didn't even notice I was there. Not even Emily, who used to run to hug me. Something had changed in that house. Something toxic. I took a deep breath. "Caroline, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I don't think I can cover another luxury vacation this year. I've already paid for the kitchen renovation, Richard's new Tesla, and the children's private school tuition." The kitchen went silent. Even Magdalena froze in the middle of wiping a countertop. Caroline looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you can't? You own a $34 million company. The company is worth that, yes. But I still have investors, payroll, expenses. And lately the business has been—" "Oh, God!" She slammed her phone down. "You're not going to give us another lecture about how hard you worked, are you? We get it, Mom. You pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, worked your fingers to the bone, blah, blah, blah." Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably but said nothing. He never did when Caroline spoke to me this way. "I wasn't going to lecture anyone," I said softly. "I'm just saying that I need to be a bit more careful with expenses right now. Maybe you could look into a nice domestic trip instead. The Outer Banks are beautiful in the spring." Caroline laughed, a harsh, ugly sound I'd never heard from her before. "The Outer Banks? You want my children to stay in some tacky beach house while their friends are in Europe and the Caribbean? Do you want them to be bullied? I don't think spending time together as a family requires a— You know what your problem is." She stood up now, color rising in her cheeks. "You hold that money over our heads. You love feeling needed. You love having us dependent on you. That stung because it contained a kernel of truth I wasn't ready to face. Maybe I did enjoy being needed. When you're a widow running a company, loneliness finds you in strange ways. That's not fair, Caroline, I whispered. I've never once reminded you of... Just say it, she shouted, making the children finally look up. Say you won't help us. Say you're suddenly too broke to support your family. My hands were shaking. I'd faced down ruthless competitors, survived my husband's death, battled cancer twice, but nothing prepared me for the venom in my daughter's voice. I'm not saying I won't help. I'm saying I need to be more... Get out, you wretch! It exploded from her like something demonic. Her face contorted, spit flying from her lips. Jason, my oldest grandson, looked horrified. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Even little Rose seemed to understand something terrible was happening. Caroline, Richard finally spoke, putting his hand on her arm. She shook it off violently. No, I'm sick of her holding us hostage with her money. If she won't help us, what good is she? What good is she? 5 words that summed up what I'd become to my own child. An ATM, a resource to be used. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally broke. I felt it snap like a twig, clean and irreversible. I stood up slowly, my arthritic knees protesting. I reached for my purse with as much dignity as I could muster. My heart was pounding, but my mind had gone strangely calm, crystal clear, like the Swiss lakes I'd visited once, decades ago. As I turned to leave, I caught Jason's eye, my eldest grandson, 14, and already taller than me. For a split second, I thought I saw shame in his expression, but then he looked away, as if I were a stranger. Magdalena followed me to the door, whispering, Lo siento, Señora Clark, her eyes conveying what words couldn't. Outside, the world seemed eerily quiet. The pristine suburban street with its manicured lawns and luxury SUVs. The spring birds singing as if nothing had happened, as if my heart hadn't just been torn from my chest. I got into my car, a modest Volvo I'd chosen despite Caroline's insistence that a woman of my position should drive something more impressive. I closed the door, and then, through my tears, I smiled. A bitter, knowing smile. Because in that terrible, crystallizing moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do the next day, and they had no idea what was coming, no idea at all. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. 7:15 a.m. The numbers on my bedside clock glowed in the dim light of my bedroom, my real bedroom, in my own house. Not the mansion I'd helped Caroline buy, but the comfortable colonial where I'd raised her, where David and I had built our life before cancer took him. I lay there for a moment, feeling the weight of yesterday's confrontation pressing on my chest. My daughter's words, "Get out, you wretch!" still rang in my ears. They probably always would. My phone buzzed. Another text from Caroline. "Mom, I'm sorry I lost my temper. Can we talk about Cabo again? The kids really have their hearts set on it." "No. I'm sorry for treating you like garbage." No acknowledgement of how she'd humiliated me in front of my grandchildren. Just another attempt to secure the vacation funds. I didn't reply. Instead, I got up, showered and dressed with unusual care. My good navy suit, pearl earrings, hair neatly coiffed. Not my typical CEO attire. I usually went for more approachable business casual, but today was different. Today I needed armor. At precisely 8:30 a.m., I called Marcus Levinson, my old business partner from when we'd first started Clark Healthcare Solutions 30 years ago. He'd sold his share to me when his wife got sick, but we'd remained friends. He'd been trying to buy back in for years. "Eleanor, this is unexpected," he said, the surprise evident in his voice. "Marcus, do you still want to buy my shares?" I asked. No preamble. A pause. "You know I do, but you've always said the company was your legacy. What's changed?" What had changed? Everything and nothing. I glanced at the framed photo on my dresser. Caroline at her college graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside her. When had that daughter disappeared? "I'm ready to sell. All of it. My entire stake. Are you still interested at the valuation we discussed last year?" Another long pause. 34 million? Eleanor, yes, I'm interested, but this is sudden. Are you sure? Was I sure? I looked around my bedroom at the life I'd built, the photos of my late husband, the books we'd read together, the antique clock that had been my mother's, and I thought of Caroline's face yesterday, twisted with entitlement and rage. I'm sure, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. We spoke for another 20 minutes, arranging the details. Marcus thought I was planning to start a new venture. Knowing you, Eleanor, you're already thinking about your next company. He had no idea I was planning to disappear. After hanging up, I drove to my bank, not the local branch where I usually went, but the main office downtown where Bradley Willis, the executive vice president, had handled my business for decades. Mrs. Clark, he said, rising to greet me in his wood-paneled office. What can I do for you today? I sat down, back straight, hands folded in my lap. I need to make some significant changes to my accounts, and I need absolute discretion. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Of course. Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. Closing joint accounts, opening new ones in Switzerland, liquidating certain investments, preparing for the wire transfer from Marcos that would arrive tomorrow, getting a new passport through the bank's executive services. Bradley's professional demeanor slipped only once, when I mentioned Lauterbrunnen. Switzerland, he asked. Are you leaving the country, Mrs. Clark? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, permanently. He cleared his throat. And your family? They won't know where I've gone, I said flatly. Something in my tone must have revealed more than I intended, because his expression softened. May I ask why? You've worked so hard to build your life here. The question caught me off guard. Why was I really doing this? Was it just revenge for Caroline's cruelty? Or was it something deeper? A final bid for freedom from the golden handcuffs I'd placed on myself. Because, I said slowly, I'm tired of being treated like an ATM instead of a mother. I hadn't meant to be so honest, but there it was. Bradley nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd probably seen this before with wealthy clients. The isolation that comes with success. The way money can poison even the closest relationships. I'll handle everything personally, he promised. When do you want to leave? Day after tomorrow. I'll sell my car tomorrow and need a car service to the airport. As I stood to leave, he asked one final question. Will you ever come back, Mrs. Clark? I paused at the door, thinking of my grandchildren, of Emily's drawings she used to make for me, of Jason before he started avoiding my gaze, of little Rose, who might grow up barely remembering me. I don't know, I answered honestly. That night I packed one suitcase, just one, $34 million, and all I wanted to take was some clothes, a few photos, my wedding ring, and my mother's locket. The rest, the house, the furniture, the art, the life I'd built, I would leave behind. As I was closing the suitcase, Bradley called. Everything's arranged, he said, but I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? I thought about Caroline, about her husband who never stood up for me, about my grandchildren being taught that grandma was just a convenient source of funds. I'm certain, I said, then added almost to myself, I'm not running away. I'm just done begging for love. The flight to Geneva was 11 hours of suspended reality. I sat in first class, my one concession to luxury, watching America disappear beneath me. My phone buzzed twice during takeoff. Caroline, no doubt wondering why I hadn't responded to her non-apology. I turned it off and slipped it into my purse. By the time we crossed the Atlantic, I decided I would never turn it on again. Switzerland greeted me with pristine efficiency. My new banker, a precise man named Mr. Keller, met me at a private exit. No customs line for clients of Banque Privée Helvétique. Just another perk of wealth, the kind Caroline had come to expect as birthright rather than privilege. Mrs. Clark, welcome to Switzerland, he said with a slight bow. Your chalet is prepared and a car is waiting. I followed him through the airport, past curious glances. An American woman in her late 60s, alone with a single suitcase, being escorted by a Swiss banker. I must have looked like a character from a spy novel. In a way, I suppose I was, disappearing from one life into another. The drive to Lauterbrunnen took nearly 3 hours. winding through landscapes that seemed torn from the pages of a fairy tale. Mountains that dwarfed anything I'd seen before. Waterfalls cascading down sheer rock faces. Villages that looked preserved in amber. The beauty was almost painful, a reminder of how small my problems were in the grand scheme of things. And yet, as the car climbed higher into the Alps, those problems felt more distant with each kilometer. Caroline's rage, Richard's cowardly silence, my grandchildren's indifference, even my company, the business I'd built from a kitchen table, idea to a healthcare empire, felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "We're approaching Lauterbrunnen," the driver announced, breaking my reverie. The valley opened before us like a vision. Green pastures dotted with small wooden chalets, snow-capped peaks rising on either side, waterfalls thundering down from impossible heights. The air when I stepped out of the car was so clean it almost hurt to breathe. My chalet was smaller than I'd expected, which pleased me. After decades of equating square footage with success, there was something liberating about its modest proportions. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with worn but functional appliances, a living room with a stone fireplace, and a small study with a desk positioned to capture the view of the Staubbach Falls. "Will this be suitable, madame?" asked the caretaker, an older man with weathered hands who'd introduced himself as Herr Ziegler. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Suitable? It was perfect. It was nowhere and nothing that Caroline could find or want. The pantry is stocked, the heating works well, and there is good internet connection should you need it, he continued. My wife has left soup on the stove. Swiss barley soup, good for the mountain air. He handed me the keys, actual metal keys, not electronic cards, and promised to check on me in a few days. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in my exile. That first night in Switzerland, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat in perfect silence. No television, no phone calls, no emails pinging, no household staff moving about. Just the occasional crackle of the fire I'd managed to build in the hearth. And I slept, without Ambien, without waking at 3 a.m. to check my phone, without the phantom anxiety of quarterly reports or Caroline's latest financial emergency. I slept like the dead, dreamless and deep, and woke to sunlight streaming through wooden shutters I'd forgotten to close. For breakfast, I made coffee in a stovetop percolator, fumbling at first with its unfamiliar mechanics, and ate a piece of dark bread with local honey. Sitting at the small kitchen table, watching the mountain mist lift from the valley, I felt something unfamiliar stir in my chest. Not grief or anger or the dull ache of disappointment that had been my constant companion. Something lighter, something like possibility. I spent that first day exploring the village, nodding at locals who regarded me with polite curiosity. Lauterbrunnen wasn't a typical tourist destination like Interlaken or Zermatt. It attracted hikers, nature photographers, and the occasional paraglider, people seeking something beyond luxury shops and 5-star hotels. In a small bookshop, I met Anne Dubois, a slender French woman with silver hair cropped close to her head and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was arguing with the shopkeeper in a blend of French and German that somehow worked, gesturing at a book of poetry she wanted that wasn't in stock. "Americans," she said to me in English, noticing my amusement, "you always find our European squabbles entertaining." "I find passion entertaining," I replied, "especially over poetry." Her eyebrows rose slightly, reassessing me. "Rainer Maria Rilke," she said, holding up the book she'd been seeking. "You know him?" I shook my head. "I know business contracts and healthcare regulations. Poetry wasn't part of my education." "Then your education is incomplete," she declared. "Come, there's a cafe across the street where the coffee is terrible but the view is divine. I will introduce you to Rilke." I followed her, surprising myself. In my old life, I didn't follow strangers to cafes. I didn't have coffee with women I'd just met. I had scheduled lunches with people who wanted something from me. Over that terrible coffee, she was right about the quality. Anne told me she was a widow, that she'd moved to Lauterbrunnen 5 years ago from Paris. and that she grew orchids in a small greenhouse attached to her chalet. And you? She asked, stirring a third sugar cube into her coffee. What brings an American businesswoman to our little valley? You are hiding or healing? Which is it? The directness of her question startled a laugh out of me. Is it that obvious? She shrugged, only to another fugitive. I studied her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the determined set of her mouth. What had she fled from? What wounds was she nursing in this pristine valley? Both, I admitted. Hiding and healing. She nodded, satisfied with my honesty. Good. Then we will be friends. Come to dinner tomorrow. I'll show you my orchids and we can read Rilke. And just like that, in a village whose name I could barely pronounce, I made my first real friend in decades. 3 weeks passed in a peaceful blur of mountain walks, evenings by the fire, and dinners with Anne. I learned to bake bread in my ancient oven. I read Rilke, struggling at first with his dense metaphors, but gradually finding beauty in lines like, "Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." I even attempted to grow a small pot of edelweiss on my windowsill, though Anne laughed at my city dweller's clumsiness with plants. Each day the weight on my shoulders lightened. Each night I slept more soundly. The constant knot of tension between my shoulder blades, the physical manifestation of running a company while emotionally supporting an ungrateful family, began to unravel. I'd bought a new phone with a Swiss number, using it only to call Anne or make dinner reservations. My old phone sat in a drawer, battery dead, a relic of another life. I tried not to think about Caroline or the grandchildren, though sometimes at night their faces would appear unbidden in my mind. Had Caroline noticed the money yet? The company sale had been finalized the day after I left. Marcus had wired the funds to my Swiss account. I'd left enough in the American accounts to cover the children's private school tuition for the rest of the year, my final gift. But the credit cards, the household allowance, the endless flow of cash that had funded their lifestyle, all of that had stopped. On the 23rd day of my self-imposed exile, I was sitting in the village cafe, attempting the crossword puzzle in a French newspaper, another of Anne's suggestions for improving my mind, when my Swiss phone rang. The display showed a number I didn't recognize, with an American country code. My heart skipped. No one had this number. No one except my banker in New York, who had promised not to share it unless there was an emergency. I answered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Hello? Mrs. Clark." Bradley Willis's familiar voice came through. "I apologize for disturbing you." "What's happened?" I asked, immediately alert. Bradley wouldn't call without good reason. He hesitated. "Your son-in-law has been trying to reach you. He's called the bank several times, becoming increasingly insistent." "Richard?" I frowned. Richard never called me directly, always letting Caroline handle any financial requests. "What does he want?" He wouldn't say specifically, but he mentioned it was urgent and concerned your granddaughter, Emily. Emily, my middle grandchild, 10 years old, with her grandfather's serious gray eyes and a habit of biting her lip when concentrating. The quiet one who once slipped a drawing into my purse, a crayon portrait of the two of us holding hands. Caroline had discouraged such displays of affection, telling Emily that Grandma is busy with important things. "Did he leave a message?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes, he said, please have her call us. It's about Emily. It's urgent." My first instinct was to reach for my purse, to book the first flight home. But then I remembered Caroline's face, contorted with rage. "Get out, you wretch!" The memory stopped me cold. Was this another manipulation? A ploy to get me to reopen the financial floodgates? Emily had always been my favorite, something Caroline knew well. Was she using her own child as bait? "Mrs. Clark?" Bradley prompted after my long silence. "Should I give him your contact information?" "No," I said firmly, though my heart raced with uncertainty. "But please monitor the situation. If there's a genuine emergency with Emily, I want to know." After hanging up, I sat staring at my half-finished crossword, seeing nothing. The cafe owner refilled my coffee cup, giving me a concerned look. "Tout va bien, madame?" he asked. Is everything all right? I nodded automatically, but everything was not all right. For 3 weeks, I'd been living in a bubble of peaceful detachment, convincing myself I could simply excise my family from my life like a surgeon removing a tumor. Clean margins, no lingering disease. But now, with just a simple message, all the complicated emotions came flooding back. Worry for Emily, anger at Caroline for potentially using her child as leverage, guilt for leaving without a word, doubt about whether I'd done the right thing. Back at my chalet, I paced the small living room, my mind racing. What if Emily really was in trouble? What kind of grandmother abandons her family without even leaving a forwarding address? But then again, what kind of mother calls her own mother a wretch and throws her out? I pulled my old phone from the drawer and plugged it in, watching with trepidation as the screen lit up. As it connected to the Wi-Fi, notifications began to flood in. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, texts. Most were from Caroline, beginning with annoyed, "Mom, why aren't you answering?" Progressing to angry, "I know you're doing this to punish me." Then panicked, "Please tell me you're okay." And finally, desperate. "The money's gone. What have you done?" There were calls from Richard too, and even one from Jason, my teenage grandson, who'd looked away when I was thrown out of their house. With shaking fingers, I opened the voicemails and put the phone to my ear. "Mom," Caroline's voice, tight with controlled fury. "The bank says you've closed our accounts. The credit cards are declined. What kind of game are you playing?" Delete. "Eleanor, it's Richard. We need to talk about the company. Marcus Levinson says you've sold everything. Caroline is beside herself. Please call back." Delete. More messages, each more frantic than the last. The company's sale had clearly sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed life of luxury. Then, the last message from 3 days ago. "Mom," Caroline's voice cracked. She was crying. "Please, call me back. It's Emily. We need you, please." I sat heavily on the edge of my bed, clutching the phone. Was Emily truly ill? Or was this the final manipulation, using my love for my granddaughter to lure me back into their toxic orbit? As darkness fell over the valley, I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over Caroline's number. Outside, the Staubach Falls thundered down the mountainside, indifferent to my turmoil. Somewhere in the village, Anne was tending to her orchids, unaware that my carefully constructed peace was crumbling. I set the phone down without calling. But that night, for the first time since arriving in Switzerland, I didn't sleep. I didn't tell Anne about the phone call. Something held me back. Pride, perhaps, or the fear that speaking my worries aloud would give them too much power. Instead, I threw myself into village life with forced enthusiasm, volunteering at the local library, attempting to learn Swiss-German phrases that made Anne laugh until tears streamed down her face. But Emily's face haunted me. Those serious gray eyes, the way she'd always been a little too watchful, a little too sensitive to the emotional currents swirling around her. Once, when she was 7, she'd found me crying in the guest bathroom after Caroline had made a particularly cutting remark about my weight. Emily had slipped her small hand into mine and whispered, "I think you're pretty, Grandma." Such a small kindness, but I'd held on to it like a lifeline. A week after Bradley's call, Anne invited me to her chalet for what she called a technical lesson. She was a woman of many surprises. Former literature professor, amateur botanist, and apparently computer enthusiast. "You Americans think everyone over 60 is technologically illiterate," she said, leading me to a small desk where an ancient desktop computer hummed. "I've been online since 1995. Now sit. I'm going to teach you email." "I know how to use email," I protested. "I ran a company, remember?" She waved away my objection. "With a secretary and an IT department, no doubt. Can you set up an account yourself? Can you attach files? Can you search effectively? No? Then sit." For 2 hours, she drilled me on creating a new email address, sending attachments, and using search engines. It was oddly comforting to focus on these mechanical tasks, to be a student again instead of the person with all the answers. "Now," she said finally, "you have homework. Use these new skills to look up something that matters to you." That night, alone in my chalet, I stared at the computer screen. What mattered to me now? My company was sold. My family had shown their true colors. My old friends had been mostly business connections who'd fallen away after David died. Almost without conscious thought, I typed Caroline Clark, Greenwich, Connecticut into the search bar. Nothing relevant appeared. Of course not. Caroline had married Richard Harrington. She hadn't been Caroline Clark for decades. I tried again. Caroline Harrington, Greenwich, Connecticut. This time results appeared. Social media profiles. Caroline's Instagram feed full of carefully curated family photos and vacation shots. Richard's LinkedIn profile, still listing him as CFO of a financial services firm. Jason's restricted Facebook page showing only a profile picture of him in his lacrosse uniform. And then something unexpected. A GoFundMe page titled, Help Emily Fight. My breath caught. With trembling fingers, I clicked the link. A photo of Emily filled my screen, but not the healthy, smiling girl I remembered. This Emily was thin, her face pale, her eyes enormous in her gaunt face. She sat in what was clearly a hospital bed, an IV attached to her arm, a forced smile on her lips. The description, written by Caroline, explained that Emily had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia requiring specialized treatment not fully covered by insurance. They needed $175,000 for medical expenses. The campaign had raised just over $23,000 in 3 weeks, far below their goal. I scrolled through the comments, my heart pounding painfully in my chest, praying for sweet Emily. Stay strong, Harrington family. Donated what we could. Wish it could be more. And then, a comment that made my blood run cold. Doesn't her grandmother own Clark Healthcare? Why isn't she covering this? Someone told me she's worth millions but refused to help. Is that true? Below it, Caroline had replied, We're grateful for all support during this difficult time. Not a denial, not a defense of me, just a careful non-answer that allowed people to believe the worst. I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. Emily was truly sick. The hospital photos couldn't be faked, but Caroline was using her illness as a public relations opportunity, positioning herself as the devoted mother abandoned by her wealthy, heartless mother. In the background of one photo, I could make out Richard, looking haggard and worried, and behind him, barely visible but unmistakable, someone was saying something. The image was blurry, but I could just make out the words formed by the mouth. She has the money, she just won't help. And there, in that grainy background of a photo meant to generate sympathy and donations, I saw the truth. They weren't just using Emily's illness to get me back. They were weaponizing it, turning it into a narrative where I was the villain who had abandoned my sick granddaughter. I felt physically ill. How had we come to this? How had the daughter I'd raised, the woman I'd poured my love and hopes and dreams into, become someone who would use her child's suffering as a tool for manipulation? But even as outrage burned through me, I couldn't look away from Emily's face. Behind the forced smile, her eyes held real fear, not the manufactured kind, not the kind Caroline put on when she wanted something. Genuine fear of a child facing her own mortality. Whether Caroline was manipulating the situation or not, Emily was suffering. My granddaughter was in a hospital bed while I sat in my peaceful Swiss exile, reading poetry and learning to bake bread. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit valley. The mountains stood sentinel, impassive and eternal. What were human dramas to them? They had seen civilizations rise and fall, had weathered ice ages and volcanic eruptions. My family's betrayal, Emily's illness, my own wounded pride, all insignificant against such a backdrop. And yet to me, they were everything. The question wasn't whether Emily was truly ill. The evidence was clear that she was. The question was whether I could separate my feelings about Caroline from my love for my granddaughter, whether I could help Emily without falling back into the toxic pattern with her mother. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the window. For the first time since arriving in Switzerland, I felt the full weight of the distance I'd put between myself and my family. An ocean, a continent, a wall of silence and resentment. And on the other side, a little girl who once slipped drawings into my purse when her mother wasn't looking. I spent the next day in a fog, going through the motions of my new Swiss life, while my mind circled endlessly around Emily. I checked the GoFundMe page again that morning. Another $100 to $100 had been donated overnight, a drop in the bucket of what they needed. More concerning was Emily's latest photo, posted by Caroline with the caption, "Day 12 of treatment. My brave girl is fighting so hard." Emily looked even paler, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. Anne noticed my distraction when we met for our usual afternoon coffee. "You're somewhere else today," she observed, stirring honey into her tea. "Your body is here, but your mind has crossed the ocean." I managed a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes." She studied my face with those perceptive eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Family troubles?" I hesitated, then nodded. "My granddaughter is ill. Leukemia." Anne's expression softened. "Ah, and you're here, while she's there." "It's complicated," I said, hearing the inadequacy of those words even as they left my mouth. What family drama wasn't complicated? Her mother and we had a falling out. "A falling out," Anne repeated, with the slight emphasis that reminded me English wasn't her first language. Such a gentle term for what must have been a violent rupture. One doesn't flee to Switzerland over a mere falling out. I looked down at my untouched coffee. "She called me a wretch and threw me out of her house, in front of my grandchildren." Anne winced. "And now the child is ill and you're torn." "Yes." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "The universe has a cruel sense of humor sometimes, forcing us to choose between our pride and our love." I started to protest that it wasn't about pride, but stopped myself. Wasn't it? At least partly. Hadn't I wanted Caroline to suffer when her cash flow suddenly dried up? Hadn't I imagined her panic with a certain bitter satisfaction? "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Yes, you do," Anne said quietly. "You just don't want to do it." Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an email notification. Anne had set it up to alert me only for messages marked important, so I pulled it out, frowning. The sender was Westfield Academy, Emily's private school. My heart skipped. I opened the email with shaking fingers. "Dear Mrs. Clark," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing regarding a concerning incident involving your granddaughter, Emily Harrington. As you may know, Emily has been undergoing treatment for leukemia and has been absent from school for several weeks. Yesterday, she attended a half-day session as part of her gradual return to normal activities. During her mathematics class, Emily became distressed and subsequently fainted. Upon regaining consciousness in the nurse's office, she asked repeatedly for her grandmother, saying, 'I wish Grandma were here,' before becoming unresponsive again. She was transported to Greenwich Hospital by ambulance. According to our records, you are listed as Emily's secondary emergency contact. We have been unable to reach Mr. and Mrs. Harrington and thought it prudent to inform you directly. If you require any further information, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Dr. Margaret Bowman, Principal, Westfield Academy." Attached was a scanned document, a medical authorization form I'd signed years ago when Caroline was going through her yoga retreat phase and needed someone who could make medical decisions for the children in her absence. I'd forgotten all about it. But apparently the school still had me on file. "Eleanor?" Anne's voice seemed to come from far away. "You've gone white as a sheet." I handed her the phone, unable to speak. She read the email quickly, her expression grave. "You never removed yourself as emergency contact," she observed, handing the phone back. "I never thought I'd need to," I whispered. "I never imagined I'd be the one to disappear." "What will you do now?" The question hung in the air between us, though we both knew the answer. There really was only one option. "I have to go back," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Emily needs me." Anne nodded, unsurprised. "When?" "Today. Now." The certainty crystallized as I spoke. "I need to book a flight." Anne's efficiency was remarkable. Within an hour, she'd helped me book a flight from Zurich to New York, arranged for a car to take me to the airport, and packed a small overnight bag for me while I made necessary calls. "I've put my number in your phone," she said, handing me my passport. "Call me when you arrive, yes? I'll look after your chalet." I hugged her fiercely, this woman who'd been a stranger just weeks ago and was now perhaps my only true friend. Thank you. I don't know when I'll be back. She stepped back, holding me at arm's length. You'll come back when it's time, or you won't. Either way, your orchid will be waiting. She nodded towards the small plant she'd given me, now sitting on my windowsill. It's stronger than it looks. Like you. The drive to Zurich passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. Was I walking into a trap? Was Caroline using Emily's illness to lure me back into their lives just to access my money? Or was my granddaughter genuinely calling for me in her moment of need? In the end, it didn't matter. If there was even a chance that Emily needed me, I had to go. The flight was interminable. 11 hours of recycled air, mediocre food, and churning thoughts. I declined the flight attendant's offer of a sleeping pill, needing to keep my wits about me. Instead, I stared out the window at the darkness, watching the moonlight on the clouds and thinking about the last time I'd seen Emily. It had been at Sunday dinner, a week before the blow-up with Caroline. Emily had been quieter than usual, picking at her food. I'd asked if she was feeling all right, and she'd just shrugged, saying she was tired from swim practice. Had she already been sick then? Had there been signs I'd missed, too caught up in my own grievances with Caroline? As the plane began its descent into JFK, I gripped the armrests, suddenly terrified. I'd left America a wealthy woman in self-imposed exile. I was returning as what exactly? A grandmother answering a school's emergency call? A mother crawling back to her ungrateful daughter? A fool walking into an emotional ambush? Too late for such questions now. The wheels touched down with a jolt that reverberated through my body. I was back on American soil, for better or worse. Outside the terminal, I hailed a taxi, giving the driver Caroline's address in Greenwich. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I sent one text message from my Swiss phone to the number the school principal had included in her email. This is Eleanor Clark. I'm on my way to see Emily. Please inform the hospital. Then I turned the phone off and stared out the window at the familiar skyline of New York, feeling like a stranger in my own country. The taxi pulled up to Caroline's house just as dusk was settling over Greenwich. The Tudor-style home looked exactly as I'd left it. Imposing, perfect, a monument to affluence that I had helped create. But now, subtle signs of neglect were visible. Unraked leaves scattered across the lawn, a porch light with a burned-out bulb, newspapers piled by the front door. The financial hemorrhage had clearly begun. I paid the driver and stood at the end of the walkway, my heart hammering against my ribs. A month ago, I'd been thrown out of this house. Now I was voluntarily returning, knowing I might face the same humiliation again. Drawing a deep breath, I walked to the front door and rang the bell. No answer. I rang again, longer this time. Still nothing. I was about to try a third time when I heard the distinctive crunch of tires on the circular driveway. Turning, I saw Caroline's Range Rover pull up, its normally gleaming exterior now dusty and unwashed. The car stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and Caroline stepped out. My daughter, my only child, the person I'd once held as a newborn and promised to protect forever, looked like a ghost of herself. Her carefully highlighted hair hung limp around her face. Her designer clothes seemed to hang off her frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, the same eyes that had flashed with fury when she'd called me a wretch. She saw me and froze, one hand still on the car door. "Mom?" Her voice was barely audible, a rasp of disbelief. I didn't move from my position by the front door. "Hello, Caroline." She took a step forward, then another, her movements jerky and uncertain. As she came closer, I could see that her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her lips chapped and bitten. "You're here," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "You're actually here." "I got an email from Emily's school," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "She fainted and was asking for me." Caroline's face crumpled. All at once, she dropped to her knees on the walkway, her body folding in on itself as a wail tore from her throat. It was a sound of such raw anguish that it pierced straight through the armor I'd built around my heart. "Caroline!" I moved toward her instinctively, maternal concern overriding everything else. I'm sorry, she sobbed, the words barely intelligible. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. I knelt beside her on the cold concrete, awkwardly placing a hand on her shaking shoulder. Let's go inside. You'll catch cold out here. She shook her head violently. I can't go back in there. It's all falling apart. Everything's falling apart. What do you mean? Where's Richard? Where are the children? Caroline looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara and tears. Richard's gone. He left 2 weeks ago. Said he couldn't handle the pressure. Took a job in Seattle. She laughed bitterly. He's filing for divorce. Long distance. Won't even face me. I sat back on my heels, stunned. Richard had always struck me as weak, but I hadn't expected him to abandon his family entirely, especially with Emily ill. And the children? I asked, dreading the answer. Jason's staying with a friend. He can't deal with Emily being sick. Says the house feels like a funeral home. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a childlike gesture that reminded me painfully of her at age 6. Rose is with my neighbor, and Emily, her voice broke again. Emily's in the hospital. They're saying she needs a bone marrow transplant. Insurance will only cover part of it. The hospital wants a deposit before they'll even put her on the list for a donor. I don't have it. I've tried everything. The GoFundMe, loans, even called Richard's parents, but they've always hated me and... Caroline, I interrupted her rambling. Let's go inside. It's getting cold, and we need to talk properly. She allowed me to help her to her feet and lead her to the front door. Her hands shook so badly that she couldn't fit the key in the lock. I gently took it from her and opened the door myself. The interior of the house was in disarray, so unlike the pristine showplace it had always been. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. Laundry was piled on the couch. The air smelled stale, with an undertone of something sour. Caroline sank onto a kitchen stool, her energy seemingly depleted. I fired Magdalena, she said dully. Couldn't afford her anymore. Couldn't afford anything after you. She trailed off, perhaps thinking better of finishing that accusation. I busied myself filling the electric kettle, finding clean mugs, locating the tea bags. Simple maternal actions that gave my hands something to do while my mind processed this new reality. How bad is Emily's condition? I asked, my back to Caroline as I waited for the water to boil. Bad. The word fell like a stone. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the aggressive kind. She needs the transplant soon, or... She couldn't finish the sentence. I turned to face my daughter, studying her carefully. Was this elaborate performance? The tears, the disheveled house, the story of Richard's abandonment, all part of a scheme to access my money, or was this genuine desperation? The kettle clicked off. I poured water over the tea bags, carried the mugs to the island, and sat across from Caroline. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I will help Emily. I will pay for whatever treatment she needs. But there are conditions. Caroline looked up, hope and wariness battling in her expression. What conditions? I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. This contains the cashier's check for $500,000. It will cover Emily's treatment, keep this house from foreclosure, and get you back on your feet. Her eyes widened at the amount. She reached for the envelope, but I held it just out of reach. The condition is this. You will never, never speak to me the way you did that day. You will never treat me like an ATM again. You will teach your children to respect me, not just the money I provide. And you will get therapy, Caroline. Real therapy to deal with whatever is broken inside you that made you think it was acceptable to treat your mother like garbage. Caroline stared at the envelope, then at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of the old entitlement, the calculation of whether she could get the money without the conditions. But it faded quickly, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. I accept, she whispered. And I really am sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me, but don't, I said, cutting her off as I placed the envelope on the counter. Don't apologize yet. Show me with actions, not words. Take this money, help Emily, fix your life. That's all I want. She reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Will you stay? Come back home? I stood up, gathering my purse. No, Caroline, I won't. Her face fell. But where will you go? That's not your concern. I moved toward the door, then paused. I'll visit Emily in the hospital tomorrow. Text me the details. As I stepped outside, Caroline called after me, her voice small and lost. I really do love you, Mom. I didn't turn around. I know, but love without respect isn't enough. I walked down the path to the street, where my taxi was waiting, the driver having agreed to return in an hour. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house, at Caroline's silhouette still visible through the kitchen window. The envelope I'd given her contained no letter, no note of forgiveness or reconciliation, just money, cold, impersonal financial assistance. Because some wounds run too deep for words to heal, and some lessons can only be taught through absence. Greenwich Hospital was a place of contradictions, luxury masquerading as healthcare, Italian marble floors in the lobby, abstract art on the walls worth more than most people's homes, a coffee bar serving artisanal espresso drinks. All this opulence for patients with the right insurance or the right bank accounts. I'd been a donor here once, back when David was alive. They'd named a wing after us. Now I walked through those same hallways as a visitor. Just another worried grandmother clutching a gift bag from the hospital shop. Emily's room was on the pediatric oncology floor, a place designed to seem cheerful with its bright colors and animal murals, but that couldn't quite mask the underlying sadness of children fighting for their lives. I paused outside room 412, steeling myself. According to the text Caroline had sent, Emily had been moved here after her bone marrow aspiration, a procedure to collect cells for further testing. She would be tired and in some pain. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn against the morning sun. A nurse was checking an IV, making notes on a tablet. And there, in the hospital bed that seemed too large for her small frame, was Emily. My heart constricted at the sight of her. She'd always been slender, but now she looked fragile, her collarbones protruding beneath the hospital gown, her arms thin as twigs. Her thick brown hair she'd inherited from me, was gone, replaced by a pale scalp with just the faintest shadow of regrowth. The nurse looked up. "You must be Grandma," she said with a professional smile. "She's been asking for you." Emily's eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices. For a moment she stared at me blankly, as if trying to place me in her medicated haze. Then recognition dawned. "Grandma?" Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. "You came back." I moved to her bedside, setting down my gift bag and taking her small hand in mine. It felt like holding a bird, all delicate bones and fluttering pulse. "Of course I came back," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I heard you weren't feeling well." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Mom said you were on a special trip, that you needed time away from us." I glanced at the nurse, who took the hint and quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. "I did need some time away," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean I stopped loving you." Emily's eyes, so like her grandfather's, studied me with that unnerving perception she'd always possessed. "Mom and Dad were fighting about money, all the time, after you left." I stroked her hand, noting with a pang how prominent the veins were beneath her nearly translucent skin. Adults sometimes fight about silly things when they're scared. "Dad left," she said flatly. "He said he'd call, but he doesn't, not really." The matter-of-fact way she described her father's abandonment broke my heart. No child should have to be so stoic, so accepting of being let down by the people who were supposed to protect them. "I'm sorry about that, sweetheart." She shrugged one thin shoulder. "It's okay. He was always on his phone anyway." She picked at a loose thread on her blanket. "Were you mad at us? Is that why you went away?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. I'd prepared for Caroline's manipulation, for Richard's excuses, but not for Emily's simple, devastating inquiry. "I was hurt," I said finally, opting for honesty. "Sometimes when grown-ups are hurt, they do things that aren't very smart, like running away." Emily nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "I wanted to run away too. When they told me about the cancer, I thought maybe if I hid in the treehouse long enough it would go away. I smiled despite the tears threatening to spill. Did it work? No, she sighed. Mom found me, and then we had to go to more doctor appointments. She looked around the hospital room with a child's resignation. Now I'm here all the time. I opened the gift bag I'd brought, pulling out a soft, plush otter. I remembered that otters were her favorite animals. I brought you something. Her face lit up as she took the stuffed animal, hugging it to her chest with surprising strength. He's perfect. I'm going to name him Swiss. Swiss? Because that's where you were, right? Switzerland. I looked it up on the school iPad. It has mountains and chocolate and those horn things. She mimicked blowing a massive alpine horn. I laughed, genuinely delighted by her unexpected knowledge. That's right. It's a beautiful place. Will you tell me about it? What's it like where you live now? So I described Lauterbrunnen to her. The thundering waterfalls, the snow-capped peaks, the wildflowers in the valley, the chalets with their carved wooden balconies. I told her about Anne and her orchids, about learning to bake bread in my ancient oven, about the village cafe with its terrible coffee and magnificent views. Emily listened enraptured, her pain momentarily forgotten. When I finished, she asked, "Can I visit you there? When I'm better?" The question hung in the air, laden with hope and uncertainty. Would she get better? Would Caroline allow such a visit? Would the fragile truce between my daughter and me hold long enough for such plans? I would love that, I said, choosing hope over doubt. There's a little guest room that would be perfect for you, and I think Anne would enjoy meeting you. She grows flowers in a greenhouse made of glass, and sometimes when the sun hits it just right, it looks like it's made of diamonds. Emily's eyes widened at this magical image. Promise? Promise. She snuggled deeper into her pillows, clutching her new otter. I'm glad you came back, Grandma, even if it's just for a little while. A nurse appeared in the doorway holding a tray of medications. Time for your meds, Miss Emily, and then rest time. I stood, knowing better than to interfere with hospital routines. I'll come back tomorrow, I promised, leaning down to kiss her forehead. As I turned to leave, Emily called after me, her voice stronger than it had been during our entire conversation. Grandma, thanks for saving me. I paused at the door, confused. What do you mean, sweetheart? Mom said the doctors couldn't help me without the special money. She said you were the only one who could save me, and you did. Her eyelids were already drooping as the nurse administered something through her IV. You saved me, even from far away. I walked out of the hospital in a daze, Emily's words echoing in my mind. You saved me even from far away. Had I? Or had I just been manipulated once again, playing the role of financial savior that Caroline had scripted for me? As I hailed a taxi back to my hotel, I realized it didn't matter. Emily was getting treatment. The money would ensure she had the best care possible. My own feelings, my hurt, my resentment, my pride were insignificant compared to her life. 2 months later, I was back in my Swiss chalet, watching the first snow of winter dust the peaks around Lauterbrunnen. Emily's treatment was progressing well. The bone marrow transplant had been successful, her body accepting the donor cells with minimal complications. Caroline had sent regular updates, her messages cautious and respectful, without a single request for additional funds. I was just brewing my morning coffee when I heard the mail slot in my front door clatter. Unusual. Most of my correspondence came through email now, Anne having thoroughly dragged me into the 21st century. On the floor lay a large envelope with American stamps. Inside was a drawing, clearly a child's work, but with remarkable attention to detail. It showed a small house nestled among towering mountains. In front of the house, 2 female figures sat beside what appeared to be a fireplace, visible through a large window. One was tall and gray-haired. The other was small and bald, but smiling broadly. At the bottom, in careful printing, were the words, "To the grandma who saved me, even from far away." I held the drawing to my chest, tears flowing freely down my face. No, I hadn't been perfect. I'd run away when I should have stood my ground. I'd let hurt feelings override a mature judgment. I'd used money as both weapon and shield. But I'd also learned something vital. Loving someone doesn't mean giving them everything they want. Sometimes love means walking away until they understand your worth. Sometimes it means setting boundaries that feel cruel in the moment but ultimately foster respect. And sometimes, just sometimes, it means finding your way back home, even if that home is now a small chalet in a Swiss valley, with a drawing from a healing child pinned to your refrigerator door. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving more, it's walking away. When my daughter screamed, "Get out, you wretch!" she never imagined I would actually leave forever. But in that moment of cruelty, I found the courage to value myself again. The $34 million I'd earned through decades of hard work wasn't just money. It was my life's effort, my sacrifices, my dreams, and I refused to be nothing more than an ATM to the people who should have loved me most. What would you have done in my place? Would you have continued to enable the entitlement, continued to be used and disrespected? Or would you have found the strength to disappear to Switzerland and start anew? When Emily fell ill, I faced the ultimate test. Could I separate my justified anger at my daughter from my love for my innocent granddaughter? The money I gave wasn't just financial assistance. It was a profound lesson about respect, boundaries, and the true meaning of family. This is the reality many parents and grandparents face. Loving someone deeply while refusing to be mistreated by them. The drawing Emily sent me, to the grandma who saved me even from far away, now hangs in my Swiss chalet, reminding me daily that sometimes saving others begins with saving yourself. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more powerful true stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your worth. Like, share, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your love?